Yorick, so we just got back from the SolaX factory tour.
Yeah, Racek invited us when we were at All Energy last year.
Yeah. So really interesting tour. I've got to say that anytime a Chinese supplier invites us over to China, I'm not going to turn it down.
No, it's always well worth the trip. You learn so much.
Yeah, but I got to be honest too that before the trip and before starting to talk to SolaX, it was never on my radar as a quality Chinese inverter.
You know, the first thing, I had a bit of a chat to the installers who specialize in SolaX. And the first thing that they said to me was, you wouldn't believe how great the installer and customer support is. And that really took me by surprise in a really positive way.
That wasn't just one or two. There was 100 different people on this tour, and I had a lot of conversations with people that was the biggest thing they wanted to say was the support is second to none.
And that never happens.
Yeah, I know.
And I think there's something to say, you know, with SolaX being in the Australian market for over a decade now, and with such a large focus on that support, they've really narrowed that down. And yeah.
You know what? And when they were talking, they were sandwiching that in with the idea, or comparing and contrasting that to other manufacturers.
There's a few new players in the market
There's
now.
a lot of new players on the market, and you just can't build up that level of support in Australia, which is so crucial when you've been around for a couple of years in Australia.
Especially when we're talking solar and battery systems. When it was solar only, you know, you had an inverter, you had the panels, there was very little that could go wrong. But now with, you know, battery communication, consumption monitoring, EPS backup, that installer support is critical with getting these systems installed.
Yeah, it's so much more complicated than just whacking in a string inverter, isn't it?
It very much is.
Yeah. So the factory itself, what do you think? We've been to a few now.
Yeah, look, I mean, after having been to a couple of factories, Huawei was the first one that came to mind, just in terms of, you know, the fact that they make their PCBs, they have a huge variety of products, everything from a 600 watt inverter up to a 350 kilowatt inverter.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things that impressed me is that they go through and actually cycle test for 4 to 24 hours every one of their inverter and battery systems.
Yeah. Huawei is a weird comparison. I would say Huawei is a lot more schmick and shiny, but I think you're right in the end-to-end sort of process and the scale of it. It was a huge factory.
And they're increasing it fourfold.
Exactly. I thought a huge factory, and they go, oh, this is one quarter of what we're building, you know, which is just pretty well insane. So let's just get across this road, eh?
Sure.
Yeah, so Yorick, they've been in Australia for 10 years, or over 10 years. How long since they founded the company?
I think they were founded in 2012. So they've been a player in the solar battery industry for quite some time. They actually started off specializing in hybrid inverters and then later moved into grid connect systems.
Yeah, okay. And so, yeah, a lot of experience under their belts because, as you say, they got into hybrid inverters or battery inverters really early.
Yeah.
They learned some mistakes with LG along the way, didn't they?
Yeah, and also the Parlantech battery. So that's, I don't think, on SolaX so much because that was a third-party manufacturer. But yeah, definitely in the early days, you know, the battery technology wasn't as good as what it is today.
And it's one of those things that experience counts, right? Making mistakes way back when we didn't have to bother with them is good for us, so yeah.
So actually, talking about the battery, so we were actually seeing some of their new products. So there's a 5.1 kilowatt hour battery module, stackable battery module.
Yeah.
And they were talking about this BMS AI, which I think, you know, it sounds a bit like a marketing spiel, but it actually looked really interesting with how they're actually using AI technology now to look after the health of the battery.
Yeah, they talked about this in the presentation when we were at the factory, and I'm like, AI, yeah, whatever. And so we're lucky enough to snag a meeting with some of their management and engineers that evening. Had a really good chat to them about what the heck they mean with AI. In BMS. So the BMS is kind of like the brains of the battery that makes sure it charges it and discharges it not too fast and not too slow. And most importantly, it sort of tries to work out the state of charge. So when your battery, like on your phone, says it's 70%, that's really just a guess. And what they're using is, you know, voltage, current, resistance, and temperature.
And what the throughput's been already as well.
Yeah, exactly. And Coulomb counting, yeah. And so, and it's going to look up tables in the BMS and saying, well, okay, this is the temperature, this is the voltage, this is all the parameters. We're guessing you're at around about 60% charge, right?
Yeah.
But that is a notoriously inaccurate way to do it.
Especially for LFP chemistry, the voltage curve is very flat.
Yeah, so what they're doing, and the way that I understand it, was still to meet, they're actually going to tee up a meeting with their BMS engineers with us later. But the way that I understand it is what they're doing is not just looking up this simple table in a static sort of way, but they're using AI to understand it historically and sort of going, well, yesterday this battery actually, one of the cells got really hot when we were charging it at this rate. So what does that mean? And it can kind of dynamically respond to the way the battery is degrading, the way the cells are heating up. And
So basically using machine learning to learn the behavior of that battery system.
yeah, which does make a lot of sense. I do think that the BMS is probably at least half of the, probably more than half of the genius behind a good battery, right? Cells are cells, you know.
But also, look, proper battery management and this sort of, precise control will enable longer lifespans, better throughput, and maybe a bit more actually capacity out of the battery systems too. So, that's a very exciting part of what SolaX has to offer.
Yeah. Speaking of cells, they use mainly REPT cells.
Yeah, actually.
And it turns out we're going down to that factory, the REPT factory soon, which will be interesting.
Yeah, can't wait to see how they get put together.
Yeah.
So another thing is actually talking about batteries, and SolaX having been on the hybrid inverter industry for a long time now, over a decade, as I said. The one thing that's quite unique is they've got multiple battery inputs on the inverters. So you say, well, why would I have two battery inputs that are independent of each other on a single hybrid inverter?
Yeah.
And well, one thing is you can have multiple battery stacks, that are different different models.
So you can retrofit later and put a different stack on with the newest generation or whatever.
Yeah, you can have mismatched sizes. So that is a solution, but there's also a vehicle to grid charge coming out, which will actually be a DC connection from the charger to the inverter through that battery port. So we should be able to see, vehicle to house, vehicle to grid capabilities for SolaX very soon.
Yeah. So all in all, I think, it's really easy to see this, Chinese sounding name SolaX inverter. You don't hear that much about it because they're fairly narrow in their distribution, being just with Razetech. They haven't sort of flooded the Australian market, which I think is good, but really quite a sort of a hidden secret in the industry almost, I'd say.
I love the catchphrase, Mark.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Relax. It's SolaX.
SolaX, yes. Yeah. And catchphrases are important, but I reckon that they probably own it from the way when we're talking to installers and they're just like, that's fine. If we've got a problem, any problem.
Yeah.
That one of the guys actually said to me that when they call up tech support, they kind of fight between each other to make sure who does the solution.
Yeah.
And they've even sent techs around there, local techs around there that are on the ground, who went around, did a software update or whatever it was and fixed the problem before the installer even knew.
Yeah, they were talking about that. Look, I think that's one thing that has impressed me and surprised me is a company like SolaX that is able to provide such a high level of customer installer support that I think is second to none in the industry.
Yeah. So are we going to bring it on? That's a bit of a complicated question. We are certainly going to test one, install one and, at a customer's place, actually maybe at an apprentice's place.
Potentially.
And test it out. And we have got this other project that is sort of in the back burner that we might end up using SolaX for that. But that's a long story.
That's a bit of a teaser, yeah. Anyway, Mark, let's have a look at this view. I mean, it's beautiful, slightly hazy. How's day?
It's lovely.
What are we doing next? I feel like we need to do something.
Oh, Yorick. Relax. It's SolaX.